Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us today. It's 3 p.m. in the UK and 10 a.m. Eastern, and you're almost welcome to join us today for 0 Days Live. If you're returning, very much welcome back. And if this is your first time, great to have you here. My name's Stuart Reed, and I'm with Nominet, focused on cyber solutions. And given the dynamic nature of cyber and the even more dynamic situation we're facing right now, we thought we'd try something new. We recognise that a lot of people are perhaps feeling a little bit disconnected from one another right now, especially as the usual conferences, the events and face-to-face meetings are being paused. So we at Nominet Cyber thought it'd be a great opportunity to do something a little bit different and create a live webcast that is open for all within or with an interest in cybersecurity. The aim of our webcast is to provide an opportunity to hear from others in the industry, get a roundup of what's going on in the news, and share some thoughts on best practice as we navigate our way through what is and continues to be a changing world. But most importantly, we want your involvement too. During today's show and any of the other live shows that you join, you'll notice in the console on your screen the ability to ask a question. So please do use that. Any questions that you have today, please ask them and we'll read them out during today's webcast. Now, it hasn't escaped me that today is April the 1st or April Fool's Day. So if anyone today has seen anything in the news that is clearly an April Fool, please do share it with us. We'd be keen to hear that and share that with everybody else. Although appreciate that this year, maybe it's going to be slightly harder to tell a truth from fiction than in previous years, but who knows? Now, for those of you that have joined us before, you will already know that we're keeping a fairly authentic look and feel to the show. What you see behind me is my home office, which now doubles up as one of the virtual studios for 0 Days Live. As a quick reminder, we're running these webcasts every day live between now and June. Now, because we are live, anything could and probably will happen. But we hope that you'll agree if and when that does happen, it's just part of the charm of the show. As I mentioned before, we have a different theme every day of the week. We have Mondays as our industry insights. Tuesday is our Tech Tuesday, where we deep dive on some technology. Wednesday, which is today, of course, is Security Begins Here. Thursday is GovSec, and then we lighten the mood on Friday with a Fun Friday. Now, each of these sessions we plan to run for about 20 or 30 minutes a day, but there are no hard and fast rules. And if you're not able to join us live for every show, or indeed the whole show, you can also catch us on demand at nominetcyber.com/0dayslive, which is exactly the same page that you signed up from. So really, it couldn't be easier. And for those of you who joined me before, you'll already know it's not just me. We've got lots of great content, fantastic guests, not to mention a great team supporting us both behind the scenes and joining me live as part of the discussion, and more of that in a moment. But as I said before, most important thing for us is that this show just is not the same without you guys tuning in. So with that in mind, any questions, please use the console on the right hand side of your screen to ask them, or if there's something that you want to see more of, more less of, then also use that to provide us comments and feedback. Just let us know. Now, as we saw just a moment ago, today is Wednesday, which means Security Begins Here. Yesterday, we were lucky enough to chat to Nominet's very own Steve Forbes as part of Tech Tuesday, learning all things related to DNS and how this ubiquitous protocol is not only critical for all network communications, but also a valuable layer of cybersecurity. Now, because today's Wednesday, Security Begins Here means that we will be speaking to a special guest about their take on the issues of cyber today. But before I kick that off and get the intros for our special guest today, I just wanted to kick things off with the pet peeves. Again, this is a question I'm asking every day to the people that are supporting us as part of the broadcast and also our guests as well. Now, I've got a new one today. and my new one for pet peeves is the internet going on a go slow just when it seems that you need it most. Now, for me, that always seems to happen when I'm trying to binge watch the Great British Bake Off, or those Christmas classics that are making a return to our screens right now. Steve, given what you said yesterday, I imagine it's when you're watching Disney Plus that you struggle the most with the internet. So with that in mind, what are your pet peeves today, Steve? Any updates?
Yeah, so today my pet peeve is PowerPoint. Now we all know and love a good slide and a good slide deck, but I think in this new world, in the new way of kind of remote working and everything, a PowerPoint for every meeting we have is just over the top. There are some great new tools out there that allow you to collaborate online without a slide deck, and perhaps even face-to-face discussion like we're having now is better than lots and lots of PowerPoint slides. So that's today is my pet peeve is PowerPoint.
Excellent, very good pet peeve, although some of the people that are tuning in with us today might prefer to see the PowerPoint presentations rather than our faces, but I'll let them put the comments on screen and let us know for themselves. And also, while you're looking at that console on the right hand side of your screen with the comments and questions, I do also want to know your pet peeves as well. So let us know what they are. We're keeping an eagle eye on those, or rather Kerry's going to be keeping an eagle eye on those and reading those out during the show. And speaking of Kerry, reminder again what your pet peeve is.
Yes, so thanks, Stuart. So I have a new pet peeve today as well, following on from a situation I found myself in last night. So back to streaming entertainment, I came to the end of the TV program that I've been binge watching. And I found myself in that Netflix, sorry, there's a cat, Netflix limbo land where I don't know what to watch next. And I just spent the whole evening bouncing from one program to another. So 8 seasons of Putting Out Fires in Chicago, and now I don't know what to watch. So if anyone, while you're putting in your feedback on the console, wants to give me some suggestions of the next things I can watch, please do.
Excellent. Well, as you already heard from me, the binge watching of either Christmas classics or Great British Bake Off gets my vote. But yeah, again, everyone who's tuning in, please let us know. Now, moving on to today's discussion, we're lucky enough to be joined by Gary Hibberd today as our special guest. Gary is director of Cyberfort, but before we introduce him to our audience live, let's hear from a quick video of Gary when we caught up with him a couple of weeks ago.
It is a collective responsibility that everyone within the organisation has some responsibility and some accountability towards information security. I think what worries me is just that how much we use technology and we rely upon technology, and yet we don't really understand what it's doing for us or to us. Is the cloud secure? Yes. Is your data secure? Perhaps.
Great. Well, I'm very pleased to give a very warm welcome to our special guest today, Gary. Gary, great to have you on the show with us. Thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Good afternoon and or good morning.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I think first things first, Gary, if I may, got two very important questions for you. One, of course, pet peeves. What's yours of the last week or so?
My pet peeve is I've suddenly become IT support for my entire family and all my friends again. I've got a background in IT, which is fine, 35 years, but it's been a long time since I've been service desk. But suddenly I've become the de facto person to go to for people who are having problems with everything from Zoom to Teams to Skype to Netflix or indeed anything. So because it's technology, I'm kind of now being asked lots of questions and why is it doing this and I can't get it to do that. So I'm tech support, and I keep trying to say to people, look, that's not my world anymore. You know, I do the cybersecurity piece. So yeah, that's my pet peeve.
Excellent. I think, again, a lot of people can relate to that as well. Now, what I want to do is pick up on a point of your video, which is my second very important question, which is around security of data. Notice behind you, you've got a wall chart of all sorts of interesting stuff going on there. Is there anything that we should not be seeing on there?
No. I'm very careful about what's behind me at any one time. If anyone's really interested, that's my workout regime for the week. I think in these times when you are working remotely, I think it's important to have routine, and that's my my workout routine for the week. So Monday to Friday, what I'm doing, you know, how many miles I'm walking during my 1 hour of exercise and such. So there's nothing confidential on there. It does talk about circuits, but it's just cardio circuits, and that's about it.
Excellent. Well, it sounds very organised of you, but I'm glad I asked the question all the same. And moving on to the kind of the important subject of today, which of course I'd like to kind of really focus on the comments that you made in the video and also elaborate on those a bit more around cloud security, because as you mentioned, we're utilising the cloud and software as a service type models for all of this kind of home working or remote working that we're doing right now. You said in your video that cloud security is secure, but your data might not be. So what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, actually, it's where we are right now actually illustrates the point perfectly, which is that cloud organizations invest millions, if not billions of pounds and dollars to protect information in their infrastructures and the technology that they use, the physicality of the data centers, etc. But cyber criminals quite often aren't attacking the cloud. That's a hard target. But the soft targets, which is the devices that connect to the cloud, that's where the insecurities come in. So when people say to me, "Is cloud secure?" I always respond with, "Well, yes, you know, by very nature of what it is, yes. But is your data safe?" Well, that's a different question altogether. So because we're working in this dispersed land that we're living in at the moment, and everyone's working on devices which perhaps aren't as controlled as they once were, that's where I think we're going to we're leaving ourselves vulnerable.
Okay, well, and that's interesting because some of the recent research that we conducted here at Nominet suggested that almost about 2/3 feel that the cloud is a secure place, or indeed sometimes they feel it's more secure than traditional on-premise assets as well. So certainly seems to be a sentiment that's shifting, which you kind of allude to there. It sounds like there's a subtlety in terms of, you know, the cloud being secure versus what happens with your data. So, you know, kind of with that in mind, what do you think are the key security considerations when organizations are thinking moving to the cloud?
Well, what you've got to think about is that if you're moving to the cloud, then potentially you essentially are putting your data into someone else's hands. And I think that's a really key thing, and it's a very simple thing to think. We've probably all heard it, but I'm going to say it again. The cloud is just means somebody else's computer. So when you are thinking about that, moving to the cloud, you've got to ask yourself, well, what is it I'm actually moving? What responsibility am I handing over to this organization? And the key considerations is thinking about knowing who your cloud provider are. So understanding who your providers are is always important in cybersecurity, but I think nothing more so when it comes to cloud. You're giving over your hard-earned data and you know, your reputation to someone else and putting it in their hands. So having you know, thinking about the visibility that you have and the control that you have currently with on-prem versus putting it into the cloud, and what does cloud mean, I think are really key considerations. And it's not just a technical issue, it's a matter of compliance and governance.
And that's an interesting point, actually, in terms of, you know, kind of understanding those kind of the shifts across into cloud from an organizational point of view. But I guess in your experience, what are the biggest security pitfalls that organizations are potentially going to fall into when transitioning to cloud?
Not doing that due diligence. I think it comes back to that previous point, is, you know, not understanding what cloud is. You know, you've got different flavors. You've got hybrid, you've got single, you've got you know, you've got platform as a service, you've got software as a service, you've got infrastructure as a service. What is it? What do you mean by cloud? And that's why when someone asks, is cloud secure? It's kind of, well, it depends. What have you put out there? What is your responsibility still, and what have you given to someone else? So we just need to be a little bit more careful about that due diligence, thinking confidentiality, integrity, and availability. What are the risks around that? And I think that's something that is often missed, that good risk assessment and due diligence piece.
And actually, that's another really interesting but kind of subtle point, is that a lot of organizations perhaps look to the cloud as a way of outsourcing things, but that's not the same thing necessarily as outsourcing your risk or the responsibility of the data that you give to that outsourcer. So it's perhaps a fine balancing act or a subtlety rather, that organizations perhaps haven't totally grasped as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, going back to that due diligence piece, and it goes on to what you just said there, is that when it comes to cloud, you've got to ask yourself, where is that cloud? Where, it's not this ethereal thing that floats above our heads. It physically sits somewhere. So where in the world does it sit? And, we've got good old GDPR to think about from that perspective, irrespective of whether you're in the EU or whether you're outside of the EU. If you're dealing with data subjects, you are bound by those regulations. So where does your data actually sit? And understanding that side of things and understanding the governance around it, I think, is really important. And it is, as you say, a subtle point that is often missed. And you cannot outsource the risk around data protection. You are accountable. If you're the controller, if you are the organization or entity that's actually collecting that data for whatever purposes, we'll not get too deep into GDPR, I promise, but you are the controller. You cannot outsource that responsibility and ultimately that accountability either.
Yeah, a good point, well made there. And Steve, anything that you want to be asking Gary around this as well?
Yeah, what do you think about as we go on and more organizations use cloud, and think about how easy it is for organizations to spin up instances now, left, right, and center, scale up, scale out? Do you think the issue, some of the issues that you're talking about, will just get bigger and bigger as we go into the future? As more organizations adopt the cloud, they perhaps put services out there, forget that they're there, and those things start to become unpatched. Sometimes people kind of lose responsibility and accountability for those. Do you think that's going to become an issue in the future?
I think so. I think cloud providers in general, obviously, talking about this, very broadly, the raison d'etre of a cloud provider is to protect the data. But this is why I'm saying that it's very, there are different flavors of cloud, there are different sizes of cloud. But I think, yeah, as complexity breeds gaps, as things become bigger and more complex, they're the things that the cyber criminals are exploiting. And even if we take away from the exploitation piece for a second, there's someone doing something deliberately. Accidents happen, failure occurs in many millions of lines of code. This is something like 10% of that is going to be error. Mistakes will happen, and you've got to, again, going back to this about the cloud provider, you've got to be able to know and trust your cloud provider, so that you can actually say, these are the guys I'm going to trust with my reputation. Because quite often the cloud provider, if there is a data breach, it's not often their name that's held across the headlines, it's the company. And they can point to the data center or that IT service company all they like. It's their name on the front page that's going to grab the headlines. And that's only going to increase as we put more cloud services out there, and we start to trust cloud inherently without actually asking some really good and nuanced questions.
Absolutely. And do you think there's a difference in the trust of the cloud across the world, for example, between companies in the UK, companies in the US? Do you think there's a different take on how secure the cloud is in different countries?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a cultural thing to some respects. I think, obviously, and culture varies in around the world, clearly. I think from a US point of view and a UK perspective, I think the UK is perhaps more trusting of cloud providers and such without asking questions. We almost take it on face value. Well, these guys have invested lots of money in this cloud service, you know, whoever it is. I'm not going to name any brands and such, but you know, these guys have clearly invested millions in this, if not billions. So we must be able to trust them. I think in the US, there's a little bit more circumspect, a little bit more questioning that is carried out. Why that is, I think historically, I don't know. It's a cultural thing, and certainly conversations I have with various different people from different countries, I get different degrees of approach and acceptance of what we're doing out in the cloud.
And I guess the kind of the final question from me before we turn it over to the audience for questions that we got from them is that, you know, given we talked about outsourcing, we talked about risk, we talked about trust, we talked about people's perception of the cloud. I guess, can the cloud really make you more secure if you use it in the right way?
Short answer is yes, because over the many years that I've been doing this, I've been in cybersecurity 20 years and in IT 35, but I have seen data on-premise server rooms, everything from you know, when it's been described as a server room, from being a cupboard to you know, a locked cabinet in the corner of a kitchen. So you know, will it make you more secure? It will make you think about your security in a much more detailed way, and it forces you down that path. So I think it's good for any organization to be thinking about cloud and what it can do for them, because you know, I'm not here to bash cloud by any stretch of the imagination. I think, you know, it's an amazing technology. It's been around for some good time, and I think it has massive benefits for us. So I think, yes, it can make you more secure because it makes you think.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gary. That's been thought-provoking. I appreciate your time on that. I know that it's a subject that resonates a lot with our audience as well. So with that, Kerry, what have we got coming in from the questions?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of questions here. I'd say they're interlinked, but I'm going to start with Ian's question. His team are considering using a technical documentation tool that stores source files in the cloud. He's asking how, as a user of that product, can you find out whether it is secure? It's a company that's based out of Sweden.
Okay. This comes back to that first point I think I made, which is about the due diligence. I think, you know, for me, it would be looking into, you know, speaking to your cloud provider, speaking to that particular company themselves. Do your background checks on the organization, on its stability, its financial viability. Looking at the actual data center itself, if you can, you know, if they can give you the address. I've done this in the past with other data centers where I've actually just gone to Google Earth and just put the address in and had a quick look around the street and been terrified by what I've seen. So it goes back to some very simple steps of just basic good due diligence. Speaking to the organization, they will be trying to sell their services to you. Speak to the account manager, ask them for the assurances. Have they got ISO 27001? Have they got PCI DSS compliance? You know, have they got 27017 and 27018? So around cloud security and personal information security. So what badges are these cloud providers carrying? Are they do they have SOC 2, for instance, which is particularly important if you're in America, thinking about HIPAA and such. So what are the documents? What is the risk around those documents getting out into the wild or being lost? And then thinking about what kind of level of due diligence you need to be putting in place around it. But it's not rocket science. It is just genuinely just going back and asking some very simple questions and asking for evidence. And then based upon that evidence, you can then make an informed decision.
Ian says thank you. So we did have a question from Justin, which I think is quite similar, which says, what questions would you ask a cloud service provider like that? So are there any others outside of the type of badges that you would advise asking in advance?
Yeah, I mean, you can ask them around, I mean, having those badges should give you confidence that someone else is asking lots of questions. So for instance, ISO 27001 there are 114 controls that an organization has to consider around their security. So an additional question you might want to ask is, if you are ISO 27001, can you show me your statements of applicability? Can you show me what does it cover? And that should then give you a flavor of, you know, does that certificate cover just the boiler room, or is it the server room, or is it in the entire business, or is it just this thing over here? So you can ask that kind of question, but also asking some, you know, getting your lawyers involved, unfortunately, you know, get people understand contracts, and just ask questions around what happens to my data if there should be a major issue. And I don't mean just a crisis or a disaster or a fire or a flood. I mean, if they were to fall into administration, who owns that data? Do I get it back? Where does it get? Does it get held in escrow? Is that now an asset of that organization? What actually happens? So asking the questions around the standards, but just asking, you know, for evidence and, you know, some of those legal questions as well.
Great, thank you, Gary. And actually, I think that, you know, it's interesting that we have both of those questions that are around questions in their own right on security. And I think that the point that's worth underlining that you're making there, Gary, is that the diligence aspect is actually really, really important. And the diligence of a cloud provider really isn't any different from the diligence that you should be making on any third-party provider of your data. So you want to be sure that whoever you're working with or partnering with, whether it's a cloud provider or whether it's some other outsource agent, has got at least the same standards and operates to the same standards that you would hold yourself accountable for in your organization, and ideally going ahead and being better than those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, going back to good old GDPR, you know, that actually stipulates that you, as a controller, you need to ensure that any data processors that you employ have got appropriate technical and organizational measures in place to protect the data or protect the rights and freedoms of data subjects. So, you know, this is a requirement of that regulation anyway. So asking those due diligence questions, just getting to know your provider, speak to your account manager, and if you can, go and visit your data center. You know, I know that's not possible with some of these larger organizations, the big badges and such, but certainly asking them about ISO 27001 and what certificates they hold is possible. And if you're using a smaller data center that's based in mainland UK or in your country, then go and visit them. Go and have a look at where your data will sit.
Excellent. Well, brilliant advice. Been great talking to you, Gary. We could explore this even further, I'm absolutely sure, and I appreciate the audience participation on this one today as well. I know it's been a subject that, especially in the times we find ourselves in right now, something that's really front of mind. So really appreciate your time with us today, Gary. Now, we're almost at the end of today's webcast, but before we close down today, I want to turn back over to Kerry just to give us a quick wash up of today's cyber news. So Kerry, back to you.
Brilliant, thank you, Stuart. So like Google, we have steered away from any fake news for April the 1st, and we're coming to you with real headlines from cybersecurity forums. So SC Magazine reports that the UK have launched a team to tackle COVID-related misinformation scans. The unit has already been dealing with 5 to 10 incidents a day. SC have also reported on how businesses are viewing cybersecurity in 2020. So it states that the impact of threats will be will be on an unprecedented scale due to the age of their infrastructure and some neglected parts of infrastructure. So attacks will be focused on those due to underlying vulnerabilities and mismanaged connected assets. And then finally, MedCity News reports that cybersecurity within healthcare is at risk, with particularly looking around digitalisation of healthcare records. And whether that's made them more vulnerable. So that's worth a look. Some good stories there, Stuart. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. So I guess one thing that to pick up on just before we close for today's session is maybe that first report by SC Magazine. It's interesting about the UK launching a team to tackle the COVID-related misinformation. That's clearly an area that is close to our heart from a domains perspective, and it's very much an initiative that we're monitoring for malicious domains that perhaps help spreading some misinformation related to COVID, or indeed any other scams that are prevalent right now. So as I mentioned, I think in yesterday's show, Ellie from our registry services business will be joining us on the show next week, and that'll be part of the discussion that we'll pick up with her then. So please do join in for that. I think that's probably about it for the show today, but want to give special thanks certainly to our special guest today, Gary Hibberd from Cyberfort. Our pleasure to have you on here, and appreciate you sharing with us your thoughts from a cloud security perspective. So that's been really helpful for us and also our audience, who certainly see that as an area that's pretty close to their heart as they start embarking on this remote working initiative, even more so than perhaps they were before.
Thank you.
Tomorrow will be GovSec Day, so Thursday. We'll be joined by Nominet's Simon Staffel, so he's head of policy and affairs, and he'll be sharing his insights with us right here on 0 Days Live. Until then, take care. See you tomorrow. As always, don't forget to bookmark this page so you can join us again without any problems. Thanks again to the team, Steve, Kerry, and again, special thanks to Gary, and of course to everyone that's joined us both live for this session and also downloading us on demand. See you again, and thank you for your time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.